Hey kiddos, it's Miss Phillips again. Moving on to the third unit that we would have missed since not coming back from spring break. This is the second to last unit, Civil Rights and Conservatism. Here you'll see a picture where it started the black and white togetherness rally where segregation was a big obstacle. The Civil Rights Movement, a protest movement against racial segregation and discrimination. It was in the 1950s. We see here no dogs, no Negros, which would have been a black person, no Mexicans. Here's another picture of a waiting room, maybe in a hospital, that there was a particular waiting room for white people only. Black people had to go to a whole separate waiting area. No colored allowed right here. This looks like it was May 26, 1925. This was a theater in Tennessee. They did not let colored people in that theater. It sought out equal rights and protection of the Constitution for all citizens, no matter their race or color. It was characterized by nonviolent protest. The civil disobedience was a peaceful protest in which you refused to comply with certain laws. In 1954, the Brown versus the Board of Education made segregation illegal. Civil rights protest. There were sit-ins at Woolworth's lunch counter in Greensboro, North Carolina. On February 1st, 1960, 4 black college students spark a sit-in movement that spreads across the nation. Ezell Blair Jr., David Richmond, Franklin McCain, and Joseph McNeil, students from North Carolina Agriculture and Technical College. These young men sat at a lunch counter in the restaurant that they were not allowed to eat in. The restaurant refused to serve them, and they refused to leave. The police would not arrest them because they were not being violent or belligerent. A white friend notified the local news media who came to publicize the protest. They returned for days open till close, and each day more protesters joined them, effectively shutting down the restaurant. The bus seat. Rosa Parks, Claudette Colvin. On Montgomery, Alabama, buses, the first 10 seats were reserved for white passengers. Rosa Parks was seated one row behind those 10 seats, but the bus became crowded, so the bus driver asked her to move back and vacate the seat for a white passenger. Rosa Parks refused to move, and the bus driver called the police, and she was arrested. Here were the first 10 seats that were reserved for white people. Here's her police report. Fingerprints. Claudette Colvin was in a similar situation 9 months before Rosa Parks. Colvin was only 15 years old, and her parents were not impressed with the stand she took because they feared repercussions from the KKK. She lost many friends because their parents told them to stay away from her because they too feared attacks from the KKK. Selma to Montgomery, Alabama. Organized by MLK, Martin Luther King, took several attempts to complete the 54-mile march to register black voters. The state troopers, under the direction of the governor, George Wallace, kept blocking the road and attacking the marchers, forcing them to turn around. Eventually, after televised news coverage of the attacks on MLK and several thousand marchers, U.S. Army National Guard troops were sent in to protect them. They were met in Montgomery by about 50,000 supporters, both black and white. The Montgomery bus boycott. Blacks in Montgomery refused to buy tickets and ride on the public bus system until the buses were desegregated. Started on the day of the Rosa Parks trial and lasted 381 days. That's over one full year. This drew media attention, and eventually the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the buses were to be desegregated. Civil rights in Texas. The Texas Constitution's guarantee of freedom of the press contributes to advancing the civil rights movement in Texas by informing the public about issues and events related to the movement. Equality for both men and women is a right protected by the Texas Constitution. Barbara Jordan was the first African American from a southern state to serve in the U.S. Congress after her service in the Texas Senate. If y'all remember when we visited those 40 students who visited the Texas Capitol with myself, Barbara Jordan was pictured in the Senate room, not in the House room, in the Senate room. Raymond L. Tellis was elected first Mexican-American mayor of El Paso in 1957, making him the first Mexican-American leader of a major American city. He also served as ambassador to Costa Rica under John F. Kennedy. Raul A. Gonzalez Jr. is noted for years of service as a judge in the state of Texas, and he was the first Hispanic appointed to the statewide office in Texas. Oveta Culp Hobby was a journalist, business leader, and public servant. She formed and led the Women's Army Corps during the Second World War. She was appointed the first secretary of the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, the second woman to hold a cabinet post. James Farmer Jr. was a civil rights leader and a native Texan who formed the Committee of Racial Equality and worked to bring an end to racial segregation in the United States through nonviolent actions like freedom rides. Hector Garcia founded the American GI Forum, led to expanded rights and liberties for Hispanic Americans. Here's some random Texas civics information. A free press, important to Texas citizens because people need to be informed to make valid decisions. According to Section 2 of the Texas Bill of Rights, Texans may alter the government so long as the government stays a representative democracy. Serving on a jury and voting for public officials are civic responsibilities of Texas citizens. Sorry about that. Texas conservatism. The time period after World War II also led to the emergence of new political powers in Texas. Democrats were splitting into two factions. The Progressive New Deal Democrats, under U.S. President Lyndon B. Johnson, was a consummate politician perfectly attuned to the ways of Capitol Hill. Conservative Democrats, Alan Shivers, was a Texas governor. Shivers stacked the members of the state Democratic Executive Committee with his supporters and began to push conservative policies. Conservative ideas, traditional Christian beliefs, the evangelical political leaders have incorporated their faith into the way they lead as a result of the evangelical movement influencing political leadership in the last several decades. Family values, nationalist and patriotic, to support lower taxes, support keeping government regulation out of businesses. From the late 1970s to the 1990s, Texas conservatives began to find their beliefs best represented in the Republican Party. This influence came political strategists like Karl Rove. Another influence was a large influx of wealthy conservative Republicans from other states. The political shift in Texas spread across the nation. In the 1970s, Texas elected its first Republican governor since Reconstruction, marking the move to conservatism in the state. Republican leaders and educational groups in Texas have differing views about spending for education in Texas. Republicans believe in school choice through voucher programs, and educational groups in Texas worry that vouchers take money from already poor and failing schools. Moving on to the Korean War. On June 25, 1950, the Soviet-backed Democratic People's Republic of Korea invaded the pro-Western Republic of Korea to the south. In July, the United States joins in on the side of South Korea to help stop the spread of communism. The war lasted 3 years. 5 million people died.
And I sure do.
The Vietnam War. A 1954 communist leader of North Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh, invades South Vietnam. In 1964, the United States joined the war to help South Vietnam fight against the communist invasion. The war was long and costly. 3 million died. 58,000 of those were Americans. The majority killed were Vietnamese civilians. Both sides of the war killed civilians, assuming they were working with the enemy. It was tragic, to say the least. The war ended 2 years after the U.S. forces withdrew in 1973 because of the rising political opposition to the war. 1975, communist forces seized control of Saigon, ending the Vietnam War, and the country was unified as a Socialist Republic of Vietnam the following year. The Vietnam War affected the economy of Texas by creating jobs in Texas to support the military.